You ever just stop and think, are we all working harder? Maybe running faster on the treadmill, but uh, not really getting ahead.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way for a lot of people, doesn't it?
It really does. So today, we're diving into this, well, potentially massive idea. Could a lot of the big problems we see, schools, healthcare costs, just the general cost of living squeeze, the wealth gap,
Even things like obesity, addiction.
exactly, could all these things actually stem from one single root issue? Like, could the way our money works, or maybe doesn't work, be the real problem underneath it all?
It's a big claim, we know. It might even sound a little conspiratorial at first glance.
Right.
But we've been looking into this really fascinating discussion between Joe Bryan and Peter McCormack, and our goal today is really to explore that idea with you.
Sort of get under the hood of the money system.
Precisely. And see if these big societal issues might actually share that common root.
Okay, let's do it. So, starting right at the beginning, strip it all back. Before money as we know it, how did people even trade?
Well, it was just direct exchange, right? Barter. You have chickens, I have carrots.
Simple enough.
But you immediately run into problems. What if I don't need carrots right now?
Or what if my chickens are worth, like, way more than your carrots?
Exactly. Or you can't easily divide a chicken. It gets clunky really fast.
So, inefficient. What was the fix?
People started settling on a medium of exchange, something everyone kind of agreed had value, so you could use it for any trade.
Okay.
Think of it like a placeholder for your actual work and effort, your economic energy, you could say.
Economic energy, I like that.
So instead of swapping chickens for carrots, maybe I give you some, I don't know, rare seashells for your chickens.
Seashells.
Yeah, and you accept them because you know you can use those shells later to get something you need from someone else.
Okay, so the shells act as that placeholder. But why shells? What makes something good money?
Ah, good question. Well, think about those shells. If they're genuinely rare, hard to find,
Hmm.
that gives them value. Right, scarcity. They also need to be ideally portable, divisible, durable, things like that. Another example they used was cigarettes in prison.
Right, I've heard that.
Yeah.
They become a form of currency.
Because they kick some of those boxes in that specific environment. They're desired, relatively uniform, portable.
Makes sense?
And over time, history shows that harder money wins.
Harder money wins. What do you mean by harder?
Harder to produce or counterfeit.
Right.
If your seashells are easy for someone else to just collect tons of or fake.
Their value collapses.
Exactly. So societies naturally gravitated towards things that were intrinsically difficult to create more of. That's why we saw this progression, from shells or beds to metals like silver and then eventually gold.
Gold.
For literally thousands of years, going way back, gold became the most trusted form of money because it's rare, it's hard to mine, it doesn't corrode, it holds its value.
Okay, gold feels solid. But carrying around gold bars seems impractical. Weren't there issues with using actual gold?
Oh, absolutely. Big issues. First, verifying it. How do you know that coin is pure gold and not just plated lead? You can't exactly run a lab test in the marketplace.
Good point.
And security. Imagine carrying enough gold for a major purchase. You're a target. Plus, people used to shave tiny bits off the edges of coins clipping. Over time, the coins become lighter, worth less.
Okay, so even gold had its problems. Is that where paper money comes in?
That's the next step. But initially, paper money wasn't meant to be the money itself. It was more like an IOU.
An IOU for gold.
Exactly. You'd deposit your gold with someone trustworthy who had a secure vault, think early bankers or goldsmiths.
Right.
And they'd give you a paper receipt, a note saying, this represents X amount of gold, redeemable on demand.
Ah, so the paper was just a claim check for the real stuff.
Precisely. And it was way more convenient, right? Lighter, easier to carry, easier to make change. The key was convertibility. You could always, in theory, take your paper back and get your gold. It really helped commerce take off.
But, I feel a but coming. That link between paper and gold didn't hold forever, did it? This is where things start to get messy. Fractional reserve banking.
Indeed. Here's the thing. Those bankers holding all that gold, they noticed something.
What was that?
People rarely all came back at the same time to demand their gold. Most folks were happy just using the paper notes for trade.
Okay.
So the bankers realized, hey, we've got all this gold sitting here. What if we issue more paper notes than the gold we actually have? They could lend these extra notes out and charge interest.
Whoa. So creating money, essentially, based on gold that wasn't fully there.
Pretty much. That's the core of fractional reserve banking. You only keep a fraction of deposits as reserves and lend out the rest. It expands the money supply, expands credit.
But that sounds risky. What happens if everyone does want their gold back?
Panic. That's exactly what happened repeatedly throughout history. Bank runs. If confidence faltered, everyone would rush to redeem their paper, the bank wouldn't have enough gold, and it would collapse.
Causing chaos.
Massive financial crises, and these recurring crises are actually what led to the creation of central banks.
Like the Federal Reserve in the U.S. What was their job supposed to be?
Well, initially, a big part of it was to be the lender of last resort, to step in during those panics and provide emergency loans to banks to prevent the whole system from collapsing.
A backstop.
Kind of. And over time, more and more of the actual gold reserves got consolidated, moving from individual banks into these central banks. For a while, individuals lost the right to redeem currency for gold, but governments could still theoretically trade currencies for gold between themselves.
Okay, so the link to gold is getting weaker and weaker for regular people, but it's still sort of there at the international level. What happened next?
The next huge shift was after World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944.
Right, I've heard of that.
This basically set up a new global financial system. The US dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate like $35 an ounce. And then all other major currencies were pegged to the US dollar. So the dollar was the center of the universe, supposedly backed by gold.
Supposedly. So what broke that system?
Well, history rhymes, doesn't it? The US started doing what those early bankers did.
Printing more dollars than they had gold to back them up.
You got it. They needed to fund spending wars, social programs, and just like individuals rarely redeemed paper for gold, other countries holding dollars rarely asked the US for the actual gold. For a while, anyway.
Until someone did.
Exactly. Countries, especially France, started looking at the growing number of dollars floating around compared to the US gold reserves and said, hang on.
We want our gold back, please.
They started redeeming their dollars for gold, and the U.S. realized its gold pile was shrinking fast. The system was becoming unsustainable.
Which leads us to 1971 and President Nixon.
Precisely. August 15th, 1971. Nixon went on TV and announced the U.S. would no longer convert dollars to gold, period. It was called the Nixon shock.
Wow. So that was it, the final break.
That was the moment the world officially moved off any kind of gold standard and onto what we call a pure fiat standard.
Fiat. Okay, we hear that word all the time. What does fiat standard actually mean in simple terms?
It means the money, dollars, euros, pounds, whatever, has value simply because the government decrees it has value. Fiat essentially means by decree.
So it's not backed by gold, not backed by anything physical, just trust in the government.
Trust, and the legal requirement to accept it for taxes and debts. But fundamentally, yes, governments and their central banks can now, in theory, create as much of it as they want without needing a corresponding amount of gold or anything else.
And this is where that website comes in, the one mentioned in the source. What the fuck happened in 1971.com?
Exactly. It's a bit provocative, obviously, but it uses charts to show how a whole bunch of economic and social trends seem to change direction right around, well, 1971.
Like what kind of trends?
Things like the gap between worker productivity and wages. Productivity keeps going up, but wages kind of flatten out after the early 70s. Also charts on income inequality, national debt, lots of stuff.
Suggesting a link between breaking from gold and these changes.
That's the implication many draw from it. You should definitely check it out. The key point is, under fiat, money can be created essentially for free by the issuer, unlike the money you earn through your time in your work.
And this ability to create money?
Yeah.
That connects directly to inflation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The feeling that everything just keeps getting more expensive.
Absolutely. Inflation, at its heart, is often described as a monetary thing. Too much money chasing too few goods and services.
Right.
If the government or central bank increases the money supply faster than the economy is actually producing stuff, each dollar or pound or euro becomes worth a little bit less.
The prices go up.
Prices go up to reflect that. We sometimes see crazy examples like hyperinflation in Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, where they printed money so fast it became worthless almost overnight.
Okay, that's extreme.
But what most of us experience is more like a slow, steady drip, that 2% inflation target central banks talk about.
Yeah, doesn't sound like much, 2%.
But compound that over decades. Over a 40 or 50-year working life, 2% inflation eats away a huge chunk of your savings purchasing power.
So the money you saved is worth much less when you retire.
Way less. It's like a hidden tax, really. It silently transfers wealth from savers to debtors and to the government that can spend newly created money first.
The source used this great analogy, the big red button. Explain that one.
Okay, imagine the government or central bank has this big red button on the wall.
Uh-huh.
Pushing that button allows them to basically create more money out of thin air or change interest rates, manipulate the system.
Why would they push it?
Well, often for short-term political reasons, right? It's usually easier to fund government spending or try to stimulate the economy by pressing the button, creating more money, than it is to do politically difficult things like raising taxes significantly or making deep spending cuts.
So it's the path of least resistance, politically speaking.
Often, yes, especially in the short term.
The island analogy really helped me here. Fratello and the Fratellos.
Right. Okay, simple island economy. They use futellos as money. The leader, Fratello,
That's your name?
he decides he wants to build a big statue of himself, but doesn't have the futellos. So he just prints a bunch of new ones,
Presses the red button.
guesses the red button. Now, suddenly, there are twice as many futellos circulating on the island, but are there twice as many coconuts? Twice as many fish?
No, the amount of real stuff is the same.
Exactly. So what happens to the price of coconuts and fish in futellos?
It goes up, probably doubles.
Right. Everyone's existing futellos now buy half as much. The value is diluted. That's inflation in a nutshell, driven by increasing the supply.
But someone might say, well, the new money doesn't go to everyone equally. Fratello gets it first.
That's a really important point, the Cantillon effect. The new money enters the system at specific points, usually through banks or government spending. Those who get it first benefit because they spend it before prices have fully adjusted upwards.
So they get the benefit while everyone else pays the price later through higher costs.
That's the argument. But the overall effect is still a decrease in the purchasing power of the currency for most people. The button enables this, and that 2% target means it's often a deliberate, planned erosion of your money's value year after year.
Wow. Okay, so if inflation is caused by printing money, the source made this counterintuitive point. Maybe the world should naturally be deflationary. Prices should go down.
Yes. Think about it. In a system with sound money that can't just be printed endlessly, what drives economic progress?
Technology, people getting better at things, competition.
Exactly. Spiralization makes us more efficient. Technology lets us produce more with less effort. Competition forces producers to lower prices or improve quality to attract customers.
Like on the island again, if someone invents a better fishing net, they catch more fish.
In less time. So the price of fish should naturally come down, right? More abundance usually means lower prices.
We definitely see that with technology, don't we? Like TVs or computers.
Perfect example. Your phone today is insanely powerful compared to one from 10 years ago, but the price hasn't necessarily gone up proportionally. Sometimes it even goes down. That's technology-driven deflation.
But then you look at things like healthcare or university tuition.
Skyrocketing. And the argument is why? Partly because those sectors are often heavily regulated, less competitive, and fueled by easy credit made possible by the big red button system. The underlying inflation makes everything else more expensive too.
So the broken money system actually prevents the natural deflation we should be seeing from progress.
It counteracts it, and in many areas completely overwhelms it. The inflation wins out, especially in services or areas shielded from fierce global competition.
This constant inflation, this need to fight against your money losing value, it must have other effects too. The source mentioned misallocation of capital and time.
Huge effects. Think about it. If you know your savings are melting away like an ice cube, what do?
You can't just leave it in the bank. You have to invest it, try to beat inflation.
Exactly. You're forced to become an investor, a speculator, even if you don't want to be. People spend enormous amounts of time and mental energy just trying to preserve their wealth instead of focusing on creating new wealth or enjoying life.
Like that example from Argentina, people spending like 30% of their time managing money.
It's an extreme case, but it illustrates the point. That's time not spent building a business, learning a skill, or being with family. And think about investment decisions. Why do investors often demand such high returns, like a 10% hurdle rate?
Because they need to clear inflation first, plus get a real return, plus account for risk.
Right. If money held its value, maybe a safe 2–3% real return would be perfectly acceptable. Inflation distorts all these calculations, pushing capital towards riskier ventures just to stay ahead.
And how does the debt system fit into this?
Well, the ability to create money easily encourages debt. It makes a borrowing seem cheaper, at least initially. This leads to cycles, lots of borrowing and leverage buildup,
Then a crash or downturn.
inevitably. And what happens then? Often, bailouts more money printing to save the leveraged institutions, essentially socializing the losses.
While the gains were private.
Often, yes. And these cycles tend to concentrate wealth and power more and more within the financial system, further reinforcing the reliance on the big red button.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is broken, fiat money, enabled by the button,
Yeah.
what's the proposed cure from this perspective? Hard money, Bitcoin.
That's where the conversation pivots. Bitcoin is presented as potentially the ultimate form of hard money, the hardest money ever created.
Why? Because fiat is flawed.
Because fiat, by its very design, can be created endlessly. The argument is that all fiat currencies are essentially programmed to lose value over time, trending towards zero in purchasing power.
Towards zero. That's a strong statement.
It is, but look at historical examples. So, if fiat is flawed, what's the alternative?
Bitcoin, apparently. But look, I know many people listening might think, Bitcoin, isn't that risky? Volatile, didn't I miss the boat? I don't understand it.
To totally normal reactions. It's new, it's different, it can seem complex, but let's focus on the core idea again.
Okay.
The problem with fiat is the arbitrary supply increase, diluting your economic energy. Bitcoin's core feature is its absolute scarcity.
A 21 million limit.
Exactly. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, period. That's written into the code. And creating new Bitcoin requires significant real-world energy expenditure proof of work.
So it can't just be printed at will by pushing a button.
Absolutely not. It takes real resources, like digital gold mining. And crucially, you can hold your own Bitcoin keys. True self-custody. Nobody can inflate it away, and if secured properly, nobody can easily confiscate it without your permission.
How does that compare to gold, then? Gold is scarce, too.
Gold is scarce, yes, but its supply can increase. If the price of gold doubles, more resources will go into mining and more gold will be produced. We don't actually know the total amount of gold out there.
Ah, okay. And storing gold.
Usually involves relying on someone else, a vault, a bank, which brings back some of those counterparty risks. Bitcoin offers verifiable digital scarcity that you can hold yourself. Some see it as the digital evolution of hard money.
The source talked about Bitcoin monetizing. What's that about?
Monetization is just the process of an asset becoming widely adopted as money as a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account.
So, Bitcoin absorbing value from other assets.
Kind of. Think of the total value of all assets in the world. Gold, real estate, stocks, bonds, billions and trillions. Bitcoin's current total value, its market cap, is still relatively small compared to those.
Right.
Monetization is the theory that as more people understand Bitcoin's properties as sound money, they will choose to store a growing portion of their wealth in it. So its share of that global value pie increases.
Which would mean its price, in fiat terms, would go up significantly.
Logically, yes, if that theory plays out. It leads to that mind-bending idea you mentioned earlier.
Pricing things like houses in Bitcoin.
Yeah. If Bitcoin appreciates significantly faster than, say, real estate over the long term, then the price of your house, measured in Bitcoin, could actually go down.
That flips the script on traditional investment thinking.
It really does. It suggests maybe the best store of value isn't accumulating more assets funded by debt, but holding the scarcest money. Of course, people worry about Bitcoin's risks, volatility.
Sure, the existential risk question.
Yeah, right. But the counter-argument is, what about the existential risks in the current fiat system? With its mountains of unpayable debt and constant debasement, which system is actually riskier long-term?
That leads to maybe the most radical idea. Separating money from the state. What would that even look like?
It's a huge thought experiment. If money, like Bitcoin, exists outside government control, what does that mean for government power?
They can't just print money to fund things anymore.
Exactly. It could imply smaller government, maybe funded more directly by transparent taxation rather than inflation, potentially less regulation driven by monetary policy needs,
Yeah.
more free markets.
That sounds almost revolutionary, maybe even scary to some.
It can sound that way, but proponents argue it would be a more honest, stable system, and it wouldn't happen overnight. It's seen as a gradual process, maybe already underway as people opt into alternatives.
And politicians are starting to notice Bitcoin now, aren't they?
Definitely. You see it being discussed much more seriously, even becoming a potential election issue in some places. There's a growing awareness that a lot of voters are unhappy with the current financial system.
The fix the money, fix the world idea.
That's the mantra for many Bitcoiners, the belief that so many societal problems are downstream effects of broken money.
And finally, the source touched on how adopting Bitcoin changes individuals.
Yeah, anecdotally, many people who go deep into Bitcoin report positive personal changes. They start thinking longer term, saving more, maybe even improving their health because they feel less financial anxiety.
The mindset shift.
A huge mindset shift. Understanding the fiat system's flaws and choosing an alternative seems to give people a sense of control and optimism. The core belief becomes very simple, almost stark.
Riches.
Fiat's going to zero. In purchasing power terms, over the long run, it's designed to. So if that's true, where do you want to store your economic energy? The argument leads you towards the hardest, most scarce asset you can truly own.
So wrapping this up, the fundamental argument we've explored, based on that source discussion, is pretty powerful.
It really is.
That our current system of government-controlled money, fiat currency that can be created at will, might be the hidden root of so many problems we face.
From inflation and inequality to maybe even cycles of boom and bust.
And that Bitcoin represents a potential path away from that, a scarce, decentralized money anyone can access and own.
It's definitely food for thought. We really recommend you check out the original Joe Bryan and Peter McCormack conversation for the full depth. Keep an open mind as you listen.
Absolutely. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. If fiat currencies are on a long path to losing their value,
And if Bitcoin is the only truly scarce asset that you can roll directly with no counterparty,
what does that really imply for how we should think about saving, investing, and securing our financial future? What does it mean for individual sovereignty?
it's a question worth spending some serious time contemplating.